afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Addendum. Continuing to discuss the topics of the poll, which again mean Reg's actually working on a patch, just in case there's going to be some other bumpkin who goes, this game is dead, right? No, again, patch is happening, so, check yourself out of the door if that's somehow really difficult to conceive. But again, next topic's basically, allied light vehicles overperforming. That one's, pretty much more straight up. But even then, there are some slight details there which I do think sort of need to be pointed out. And basically, it sort of basically boils down to, in the case of the Americans, this dude is just straight up damn too good. It's a light tank which can hit faster than any other light tank, and almost faster than any light vehicle. Then the 222 can still hit faster, though. The 222 is also a lot cheaper, but still, this dude can hit really, really fast. In part because it's really easy just to tech for it. Again, you just need 60 fuel, which is just roughly the amount of time you need to get up a light to make a nice company for the Germans, in theory, as an example. And even then, they have the capped, which comes along, so they can just rush it out, so it can just hit really fast. And what do you then get for that price? I mean, the price is roughly around the same of the T70, slightly cheaper than the looks, obviously more expensive than the 222, but again, those aren't really, the 222 is not really what you call a light tank, but still, it's, reasonably cheap. And the thing is, it tends to pretty much outperform anything there and can sort of last into the late game quite nicely due to just the combination of things it has. I mean, basically, it's a light tank which has the same durability as the looks, roughly the same anti-infantry performance, if not better in some senses. It doesn't have to rely on autocannon, but it's just a main gun with a pretty solid AoE for a light tank, good accuracy, coaxial machine guns, which can, and of course the gun can also then deal with light vehicles reasonably well. It can self-repair, which the looks can't, and again we're sort of comparing in that department. It also has a stun ability, which allows to basically either to sort of get an upper hand in any engagement, or allow it to disengage with anything that can actually destroy it. And the thing is, in some departments, really get to remove those abilities from similar, units. For example, the Stewart, for example, had, stun ability for some time. That was removed, but not on the Stewart. Same, on, I think, the Puma. Actually, that one might still be remaining. That will probably get removed and should be removed. But, even then, that's a veteran ability. This is not. And again, it pretty much means the Stewart can have a huge effect into the late game. We can just give you the hands up, in any engagement. Stun the vehicle, then hit it with a lot of anti-tank. Or, get into a bad situation, stun, and get the devil out of there. While again, it can self-repair, it can critical repair as well, meaning even if you get Panzerfaust, it can quickly fix that and get out of there. Meaning the Stewart, besides having quite the impact, is also really difficult to knock out because thanks to its high health, again, it can survive several hits from anti-tank guns and other anti-tank assets. Basically meaning, again, for roughly the price of a T70, you get something that easily outperforms the T70 faster. And the T70 itself is pretty damn good. The Stewart is, for all intents and purposes, even better. So that's basically the problem there. I mean, or to put it in other ways, simply most Americans at the moment just go for the captain into the Stewart because, again, this dude is just a no-brainer of a choice. And, of course, the thing that sort of further makes the Stewart then really good is it comes into the tier filled with anti-tank, meaning some of the counters for it, say other vehicles or Puma, will then face further counters of them. Again, counters of the bazookas, anti-tank guns, meaning the counters or anything that can actually hurt the Stewart finds itself surprisingly, with a hard time. And again, your anti-tank guns can't deal with it because that requires your Stewart, or the Stewart to hang about for at least 3 shots, which requires your opponent to be absolutely inept. And usually anything that relies on the rule of your opponent being completely incompetent is generally a bit too good. So again, the Stewart there basically just has a lot of things. And again, it's part of the tier, part of the fact it can be hit so fast, and just so hard to kill while it can have such an impact on its own that just makes it so overperforming. This dude is probably the closest you get to a broken unit in the game as possible. This dude is simply that good. And that's a problem. And again, in part, it's just because of the tier it's part of, which just makes it so damn good. But also, again, just the effect it can have. I mean, the problem was in part, again, at a point the Stewart wasn't really good. Then it got buffed. Then they just decided to skip the whole tier 3 thing because at the one point, the Americans basically had, this. And it was all linear. Now it's less linear. Again, you have to get either platoon or company command. Because, again, they moved the Stewart a tier down and didn't, remove some of the buffs. And that's basically sort of what's causing problems alongside the new mortar, which also means one of the counters, the Pack 40, which again is already having a hard time, now can be very fast countered by the mortar. And again, it's basically sort of just a perfect storm or a lot of awkward things that is just results in the Steward being so good. So again, I mean, they're going to have to nerf the Steward, obviously. And of course, the Matt, your question is, how do they? I mean, obviously, one option is just to limit the anti-infantry, move towards the platoon command post, but also make it more expensive, so it's still a bit hard to get. Otherwise, you just make it even more able to get out faster, which is a bit of a problem. Either that, or you make the student more expensive, though. Of course, then you move it towards a tank. But at the same time, you can do it by just making the manpower-wise more expensive, or you could make it require an extra upgrade from within the company command post, so that way you can't just beeline for the Steward as easy, because that's just one of the problems. So at the same time, it has to give up something. Either it needs to lose some of its durability, some of its health, some of its armor maybe, or some of its anti-infantry. Even then, I'd probably recommend a small cut in health, small cut in anti-infantry, and maybe moving the stun ability to a veteran ability. That way the Steward would be less overpoweringly good, and that's sort of the problem there. If you look at the British, that's the AC there. I mean, that one's also good. It's not quite as good as the Steward in some ways, but it's still potent. I mean, costs roughly around the same thing as the Steward. In fact, hit faster than the Steward, almost, because the overall resource required to get through that one is even lower than the Steward, by the way. Meaning, even just sort of, as we can actually delay the Steward a bit when you're having a decent or good early game, which can actually slow down a bit, versus the British, that one's even less applicable. So again, that one's also pretty tough. It doesn't quite have the same sort of strength of the Steward. It doesn't quite have the same ability, but it does have a smoke, which can sort of allow it to get out of there. It doesn't quite have the same amount of health count, so certainly self-repair, but it's still quite tough. It can easily deal with most light vehicles, plus the main gun and the coaxial machine gun can allow it to deal with infantry, and the main gun actually has the potential of still killing several men, even wiping squads at times. I mean, in that regard, again, it's basically a case of, vehicle that is fast out, reasonably potent, can deal with both tanks and infantry. And again, that's sort of, the combo there again with certain sort of tends to be almost the theme here. They're good versus both infantry, light vehicles, fast out, very hard to stop or slow down, and they're also very difficult to stop. In the case here, of course, it's not quite as bad against the Steward. There's not quite as many factors just allowed to be even more overpowering. There's no just super anti-tank here, though. Again, it comes with anti-tank guns, in this case, the anti-tank sniper. So even then, there are a few factors there. Overall, with this AC, I'd probably just say lower its anti-infantry overall, or lower its rate of fire on the main gun, that way lowering the output there and also making it more easily for some vehicles to counter it, because again, it can counter Pumas. And in case of the 222s, it basically requires 3 of them, which means you have to invest an absurd amount of resources just to deal with that one, or again, get lucky with your anti-tank guns on your mines. And again, if you hit it with a mine, that's great, but again, that tends to require a bit of luck, which again, yeah. In particular, since German telemines, for example, tend to be hit and miss at the moment. They're a bit bugged, so yeah, that's not too fun either. So while it's potent, it's not quite Steward country yet. Anyways, unless they decide to buff it again for inexplicable reason, which of course would be completely opposite to the stated goals and acknowledgement that light vehicles are overperforming. But again, it tends to be a bit the problem again. They're good versus light vehicles, good versus infantry, cheap to get and fast to get. And somewhere again, something has to give. And in this case, just lowering the anti-infantry output to an extent, I think at least from the main gun, would do a lot there just to make the AC less silly good. And then, of course, we finally come to the T70 light tank overall, the sort of tier 2. And in this case, the sort of is also quite potent, but it's not quite as good as vehicles. In fact, some 222s can more easily take that one down. So in theory, it's sort of more within the realm of control. The problem is that the T70, or a pair of T70s, is really, really, really good at wiping units. You can hit retreat there and you can still end up losing it because A, it's really fast, and B, it's quite accurate, has a high rate of fire, and thus has high potential of just wiping units. And that means the T70 can be an absolutely devastating shock unit that suddenly comes out of there, and if you're not ready for it at all, it completely turned the game around. Even in control, you got most of the map, a single T70 can just completely devastate you. And that's, again, what you could call a bit of a problem. Because, compared with the Germans, say, the Wehrmacht, there's absolutely no unit that can do the same. They're Austrians, Panzer IV, Panthers, Sturmpanzer. closest might be, Tigers or Stoogies, but the Stoogies, stupid and needs to be fixed and also required to tech. And the Tiger, and even then, can actually, hard count and also a lot bloody slower. And even then, most cases the Tiger's not going to turn things around. Even the Tiger Ace doesn't have that effect. And again, the T70 can turn entire games around, and if the player's already in the lead, the T70 can knock things down. It's simply because of an extreme anti-infantry output, which of course also resorts to another issue, sort of internally within the Soviet army. I mean, it basically makes the AA half-track the other, which you think also is a pretty good anti-infantry counter more used, but it doesn't, because the T70 just does the job better, because that one can self-repair the AA half-track can't, and you don't have to spend 120 munitions on the T70. Again, so cost-wise, the T70 makes more sense than the AA half-track, because again, the T70 and the AA half-track more or less fulfill the same role. The AA half-track has a bit of suppression, but generally it won't need suppression if it dies in like 1 or 2 shots. In that regard, the T-70's issue is basically, A, it's overperforming within the Soviets, but also just against the Germans. And in that regard, my suggestion, as I sort of mentioned in some previous videos, would be to lower, its anti-infantry ability, increase its penetration, sort of more useful against vehicles in case of its flanking, and then that would also allow the AA half-track to shine more, because again, it's pretty good. It just isn't T-70 good, which again is sort of, the issue. It's not semi-broken good. And in that regard, again, the T70 does need to be nerfed, but of course it still needs to have some kind of role. Sort of like the intermediary between the AA half-tank and the S-26. Again, it's not going to take on any tanks head-on, but if, say, flank something, it can still do a decent amount of damage. Again, it just can't, pursue units and annihilate, half the German army by sneezing in their general direction. I mean, if that were to happen, again, as you might notice, the bigger theme here is basically, again, limiting anti-infantry and just wiping half the German army potential at a very quick pace, which again is sort of the problem. I mean, they have this just huge swing capability, each of these units, which again can mean even if a German player is in the lead, even if they do prepare, things can still go sour. In some cases, they won't even have time to prepare. Again, that's, for example, the case of the Stewart and the AEC. They can simply hit so fast that you might not even have time to bring out counters for them. I mean, that actually happened, just as about to hit my pack 40, a Stewart hit, and I was actually going for a very fast tier 2 rush on top of that. So, I mean, it's basically just huge shock values, which again are hard to kill and can just swing the entire game around. That's usually the definition of, overperforming. When it happens early in the game, I mean, later in the game, there might be some decency there, when you call in the really, really big unit to an extent. But, the thing is, I mean, the Wehrmacht doesn't have anything like that. And they can't call in a Panther, the Allies have to respond to it. And even, they might struggle to respond to it. I mean, if they have responses, the Panther tends to be pretty limited. As an example there. So, I mean, that department, again, the Stewart, the AC, and the T70 are definitely overperforming. Again, the Ace key lies in lowering their anti-infantry outputs. They can still do damage, but again, they should not be able to just easily annihilate entire squads within the blink of an eye. I mean, that's basically the problem. Not when they can also, survive it in many cases, deal a lot of damage to vehicles as well. I mean, again, it's just a case of too much in one tiny, cheap package. And that's basically what Relic will need to resolve. Then again, overall, I think, again, lowering the anti-infantry there is going to be the key in different ways. In the case of the Stewart, also lowering a few other parameters. So, there you go. Hopefully you liked this video, found it educational and so on. If you did, subscribe, like, share, and comment on it. This is Imperial signing off, and in another 2 days' time, I'll probably have a video covering something else. Cheers, everybody.